Hello, it's your boy OffyD and I've been playing Homeworld Remastered, and now I'm going to tell you what happens in Homeworld Remastered, or specifically what happened to me, looking at only the most important bits, and we'll talk about the game in general and my thoughts on it as we go along. The interesting thing to take away, I suppose, from the tutorial is the game's 3D move system. This ain't your average space game where space is basically sea combat taking place on a 2D plane. Here you can go up and down, which is pretty cool, but of course introduces the fun factor of having to control that, and the fact that the game is sort of portrayed as happening in 2D, as you can kind of tell by these circles they've got going on here. Essentially, it's like a big, very wide cylinder the game maps. We'll see how that plays out in practice as we go along. Now we begin the story of the game. I was completely fooled by the game's initial story because it just sort of begins with no context, saying that 100 years ago, an ancient ship was discovered under a desert, and it has the location of our homeworld. And I thought what they were talking about is this is Earth, the people on Earth discovering that humanity is actually from a different planet in ancient times. That's totally not what they were getting at, simply because there's one thing the game doesn't tell you, and I've got pretty far in the game so far and it still hasn't told me this. I actually looked this up on the wiki the other day. This takes place in the far future, and this planet we're on is some part of a huge human empire that covers most of the galaxy. However, we forgot about that or something. Well, we'll come back to that. I have to skip over the quite cool opening cutscene where we see the mothership, our central unit, for the first time, because it probably has copyrighted music playing during it, which is always fun. But I quite enjoyed that it shows you the process of how your gigantic colony ship to go and find this home world we've discovered was produced over the period of like 60 years or something, very slowly, very realistically, with tons of chatter that sounds something like NASA chatter or something, of how people might be talking when they are launching a gigantic engineering project. It had a very immersive and realistic vibe, this opening stage. There's also the first stage of the game, which is quite immersive. You're just testing the ship and moving around, pressing buttons to see if it works at all. At the end of the first stage, you have to do this thing where you dock your ships, and this happens after every stage, but what I'm not sure about is whether this is important or not, because you can press a button to skip it. And this actually does have a gameplay effect to consider, well, several gameplay effects to consider, which again we'll talk about in the future. So the second mission is that you're going to find a ship that was launched 10 years ahead of you in the vague direction of this home world we've found out about. And the idea is we're just going to slightly hyperjump to this new ship's location in order to test out the hyperdrive, and then we won't be too far away to come back if it's broken and this new ship can provide us with supplies. And I was just thinking that's such a realistic consideration. If this was Mass Effect or something, you would just press a button and hyperdrive to the location. But no, they spent 10 years testing the system before they used it, and I was like, how engineering of them. It feels like this was written by a true sci-fi fan, a true technology fan. Well, it all goes wrong about here, and this is also when my ideas about what this game was going to be went wrong, I suppose, as well. Because we discover the ship we sent out is actually already dead. I'm not sure how we didn't know that already. Maybe they just don't usually check in with us or something, so we didn't notice they'd stopped broadcasting. And it's been killed by some other guys. So while the game doesn't tell you this is where we're starting to learn. The galaxy is already inhabited by various human empires, or possibly only one with loads of vassals, I still can't really tell. We used to be in it, but we forgot, and now we're just sort of getting back into the swing of things. We've rediscovered space travel and such. But unfortunately, there was some sort of law, it turns out. Someone mentions this over the radio, that nobody is allowed to use hyperdrives without the Central Human Empire's permission. So by reverse engineering this broken hyperdrive and using it to jump to here for our test, we've now earned their ire. So we're now at war with some guys, and here they are immediately attacking us. I think these guys specifically aren't the guys we're at war with. Maybe they're pirates or something. Obviously, I can't quite tell. It feels like there's some really interesting lore going on in this game, but I also felt like it didn't tell you enough about it right up front. It needed to at least have like a premise or something to let me know what was going on, because I only know how much I know because I went on the wiki and read it after getting so confused. One thing I'll note is that in this game, you have two control modes, the sort of normal one and this one, the map view, where you're more zoomed out and all of your stuff just looks like icons, and I kind of prefer this zoomed out view because you can see where things are, but it feels like you're not supposed to play the game like this because various UI elements don't show up when you're in this mode. Most importantly, things like health bars and the ability to tell which ships your ships are attacking. So you kind of have to switch between these two modes of looking at the battlefield. One solution is to have the camera as high as possible while in the regular mode, so you can still see all of your units, see the little icons over them so you can tell where they are, and also see their health bars, destinations, and targets. I'll have to rant more about the camera later because the camera does have some interesting nuances to it that stack on top of the already interesting nuances of having a camera facing down through a 3D space where you can't specifically click on a depth. We don't have depth to work with here, which is already going to be a nightmare. I think they've designed it pretty well, all told, but still, I'll complain as it comes up. We end up defeating the mysterious attackers with relative ease and then analyze the debris to discover that they're surprisingly similar to us for some reason. Well, we're starting to work out what that reason is. We're on the cusp of our characters, I suppose, discovering that there's something going on here with the rest of the galaxy being very inhabited. We actually go back home to just sort of regroup after this, but the problem is the rest of the enemy's already here, and they've actually already carpet bombed the entire planet, so everybody's dead by the time we get back. It's just us now, but also a few of those grey trays you see floating there, some of our planet's people were kept in space for colonization purposes, so we actually can rescue a few people. We're being attacked by these frigates and we're instructed to capture at least one of them, so this introduces the capturing ships mechanic. And well, I wasn't a huge fan of this for a complicated reason. This part of the mission actually took a while because it turns out you have to send 2 capture ships to capture one of these enemy ships. So eventually I discovered that and was able to complete this section. We'll skip over what else happens here because I'm too paranoid about the potentially copyrighted music playing. I got a video blocked worldwide the other day for copyrighted content, so now I'm extra paranoid. So we'll just skip to the end. We defeat the force that was blowing up our planet, but most of them presumably left already. And now it's just us floating here, and there's a cutscene where we analyze some debris and find a video recording of the attack we just missed happening. Not all that important. So here's the reason I was a little bit worried about this capturing things mechanic. It combines with another mechanic the game has that I felt a little bit worried about when I noticed it. That mechanic is that when you complete a stage, you start the next stage with the units and resources you had in the previous stage. So while it's a missions-based campaign, it's linear, they're not independent of each other. How you do in each stage will make the next stage easier or harder. So you can potentially detect there a positive feedback loop, the old enemy of game design, where if you're not good at the beginning of the game, the time when you're most likely to not be good, it might have consequences later actually. You can't just get good by playing the game, you have to play it a certain amount and then potentially start again, which in many games is a fundamental part of the game design, so it's not necessarily a bad thing to have it, but I think that it is, mainly because one of my priorities in playing a game is to get the content the first time around, and I usually come in with this entitled expectation that the game will tell me everything I need to know to play the game. It'll just be one run through, see the content, come away with whatever the developers intended relatively easily. Even if the game itself is hard, if that's what they intended, then fine, that's what I got out of it. Well, in this case, as well as not really knowing what's going on with the plot too much, this idea that you can capture ships and then all the ships you have at the end of a stage are the fleet you start the next stage with is this snowball effect basically, when now the optimal way to play the game is to capture absolutely every enemy ship. So I'm left wondering, what's the meta here? To what extent did the developers expect us to be capturing every ship? Because they've provided this mechanic, and I presume it's going to get difficult enough at some point that we need to be using that to increase our numbers, because of course capturing is vastly more efficient than destroying enemy ships, especially because there are finite ships you can build yourself in each stage. So, does capturing enemy ships ultimately lead to so many losses in the attempt to do it that it's not worth it? Should you have just shot the enemy at a distance? Should we be capturing everything? Should we be capturing the odd ship now and again? Well, this is what I now don't know, and I'm mainly worried because I'm looking down to the end of the game and thinking, where's the soft failure state if I ignore this mechanic? Since we don't know, the sort of safe option for me is to go for the, well, I should always use it idea. But the fact that I can't will then be a constant source of anxiety for the entire game, never knowing if each seeming success as I defeat the enemy was not an efficient enough defeat to allow me to do it again in future stages. Well, I haven't played far enough into the game so far to know how badly I'm doing. Perhaps some veterans will see as we go into these stages, and things do indeed start to get a bit difficult, and I'll be forced to at least sometimes try and do some captures, but it's usually easier said than done. We'll see, anyway. Now, with the rant done, let's move on. We learn in the cutscene that we interrogated somebody who we captured from one of those ships earlier to work out what's going on, and it's revealed that we broke this anti-hyperspace treaty from 4,000 years ago. What I still don't know in the plot is whether we are at all supposed to be surprised to discover that there is a human empire that we were once part of or something. It seems like us, whoever we are, we're more surprised to learn that we broke a treaty than that there was an empire ruling the galaxy to begin with. So I don't know how much we forgot about where we came from, but we forgot the law, I guess, and the punishment was death for everybody, it turns out. Very harsh law. The next mission, well, it's just a little simple thing. We sort of hyperdrive away from the death zone to pick up some asteroids and think about what to do next, and here I am watching our little things picking up the asteroids. Then we get visited by a gigantic alien-looking ship. I don't know if this is supposed to be aliens or not, another plot confusion. We send out somebody to go and talk to this random thing that appeared in front of us all of a sudden. And they turn out to be basically trying to sell us some weapons. So, okay, we'll give you 500 unknown units for plasma bomb launchers. This is basically a technology we're buying that unlocks the ability to make bombers as well as our fighter-type strike craft. And then they just go on their way after this. They're called the Bentusi, and I think they're supposed to be aliens, maybe. Their voice has reverb, so that's something. And they don't like to hang around. They did warn us, though, that the Empire is sending some guys to kill us again. So they found us again, and we're about to be attacked. And indeed, we do get attacked by a bunch of random stuff. So I send my triangles to go and fight with their triangles. One useful feature is bandbox attacking in this game. You can tell a group to just hunt down an enemy group one by one and sort out the details on their own, which is quite important because I have noticed in many cases if you don't give your ships attack orders, they might not attack, or at the very least it changes their AI behavior based on whether the enemy is just nearby and they're perhaps just evading being attacked, versus actually attacking the enemy deliberately, which requires that attack order, or to put them on the aggressive stance, which they by default don't go onto, and it constantly switches itself off if you do switch it on for various reasons. Maybe I'll rant about that later. Well, anyway, we get attacked by a more substantial group, and you can see me here deliberately not defeating the enemy, because I've got this capture thing in mind now. We're starting to get into this. I'm going to send my fighters to attack something else and leave this enemy frigate alive. And then these two salvage things, these squares moving towards the enemy diamond, will go in there and just steal the enemy ship out of space. The risk is, of course, that if you stop attacking the enemy, they might turn and just attack your salvage ships, and then you'll just be wasting the opportunity. But in this case it works out fine, and there we go, our two little things will steal the enemy thing, then we'll have an additional thing in the next thing. So it's all about the thing positive feedback loop here. So while it's satisfying to do it, it may be equally unsatisfying to not be doing it, like here where I'm shooting some of these enemy ships. Should I feel bad about this? I do enjoy, though, the fact that in this fight, we have our two salvage ships go back and just take one of the enemy ships. It's so precocious to just be like, alright, you're just coming with me. They don't appear to be able to struggle or do anything about it. They just switch their engines off and resign themselves to their fate, that we're just going to tug them into the mothership and then do whatever we do to make them join our side. It's all very amusing. But the thing that I'm getting at is just the potential dissatisfaction of not doing it. Because I know I should have done it to all those ships, I could have just tanked their attacks onto the mothership for ages and gradually captured them all, especially if I'd built more salvage ships. I could have taken them all at the same time and just ended the fight right away. Perhaps potentially an actual better military strategy than fighting the enemy, because the salvage ships are just so cheeky. They then attack us with this carrier. I didn't try to salvage the carrier, but I think in retrospect you can salvage these things. So if I sent loads of salvage ships, I'd be able to drag the carrier down and then have a nice carrier, which is basically a second mothership of sorts, a lesser mothership. That would have been really good to have early on in the game, wouldn't it? Instead, we blew it up, which completes the stage. This takes us into the strange post-level phase, where at the end it's telling you to just leave and go to the next level, but if you don't, you can hang around and just build things and organize your fleet, which of course matters because this is the fleet we'll start with, including things like control groups. They'll all be carried over into the next stage. But the perhaps bigger thing to worry about is money. If we just left now, we'd be leaving money on the table on this map, so we sort of want to sit back and just do nothing for a while our resource ships gradually pick up all of the asteroids. Or do we? It seemed like maybe this is what you had to do, and I was very unhappy with this arrangement because it's essentially nothing, and it's another case where the optimal gameplay route is not one I really want to do, something similar with the salvage ship thing. So I was kind of put off by that. I ended up later looking up what the deal is with getting resources at the end of a stage. It's a little bit more generous than I thought it was, but still not as generous as I would like it to be. Well, we'll look at that as I discovered it a bit later. For now, I sat back and did nothing for ages, organised all of my control groups and formations and such, and waited for the money to roll in. Just thinking maybe this will pay off big time, because of course in a positive feedback loop game design, the best time to work as hard as possible and do the most annoying things is as close to the beginning as possible, where the compound interest of working hard here will be the greatest throughout the game. We're back at it again with the Nobel Prize in Economics winning analysis of Homeworld Remastered. At some point we move on to the next stage, where we've essentially caught up with the fleet that blew up our planet, so we're now going to attack them for revenge. A bit haphazard, I think, given that we know very little about them, but we're going for it. In this stage, it's a bit like a competition really, it's more like a normal RTS stage, because they also have a carrier at the other end producing units, and they have resource collectors going out to pick up the asteroids. So we're competing over the asteroids in the middle, but I can send all of my bombers to just completely obliterate those resource collectors. Probably a bad idea, I suppose, because we could have captured them here if I'd been more prepared and been more thinking about that. Instead, I tried to destroy them, but strangely this didn't work very well. They sat there, collecting their asteroids while being bombed, and most of them actually escaped. 2 of them are already on the way out of the fight, the other one's alive in the middle somewhere, and we destroyed 2 of them. So that went worse than expected basically, and then of course there's the fight to consider. The enemy fleet is just sort of here amongst the mess, and their fleet had loads of these frigates in it. We're not allowed to build these things yet. And these frigates took out all of my corvettes, which is the biggest ship I can make. So we end up just with a swarm of fighters dancing around the frigates. I presume the frigates have trouble hitting the fighters, that's usually how these games tend to go. So we eventually destroy them, and I think I did capture 1 or 2 of them in the process. Then we go on to attack the enemy carrier. By this point we'd already taken out their resource collectors, and you see me here having some trouble with the camera, and I thought I'd mention this strange thing about the camera that I think I alluded to earlier, which is that the camera often focuses on things. So if you double tap the command key for a group, like you tap 1 twice to look at group 1, the camera then focuses on 1. But if, say, group 1 is below the central plane of the stage, so it's further down than the average ship, what happens is the camera's maximum height, I suppose, is reduced. So it's as if your camera is focused on the middle of the stage, you can move it all the way up and down to the bounds of where you're allowed to go. But if it ends up being focused on something that's not in the middle of the vertical space, the limits move down. So essentially you can end up in situations where something is above the highest level that the camera is allowed to go and you can't look at it. You can actually rotate the camera to look up if you want, so you can get away with this, but for clarity purposes, especially while filming, I tried to keep the camera facing the same direction the whole time, so there's some notion of continuity between these cuts. And, well, it just seemed like an unusual thing. I don't see why, if I focus on something that's low down in the map, I still shouldn't be able to zoom all the way up to the top and see the top part of the map. I wonder if it was intended to be played with the camera more facing top down or something, or more facing sideways, where this issue might not be so strong. Basically, I specifically had a weird issue with the camera, sometimes, that's hard to find footage of, hard to describe. I don't know what I'm complaining about really here, but I'm complaining about something, and well, that's what these videos are for. So we've now completed this stage. And I'm left wondering again, should I pick up all of the resources that are on the map? There are loads all over the place around here. But I didn't want to, and I didn't want the game to be like this, so I decided to go to Reddit, which is always a bad decision, but here we're able to find out from somebody from 8 years ago that it automatically collects things that you can see at the end of the stage. So not everything on the map, but the resources you can see will be collected. And that's why, at the end of the stage, simply clicking Quick Dock is probably the best idea, because if your ships are still out on the map, you have maximum line of sight on it, and you're going to get the most resources by just suddenly leaving the stage. So as we saw there, I gained over 10,000 currency units, which is loads basically, by just ending the stage without going back to the mothership. Still not sure what's going on with that docking sequence thing. I think it might just be there to be cool or something, but it seems there could be a real gameplay disadvantage to doing it, and it takes way longer, so not quite sure what the deal is. Now, in terms of the plot, we've got a bit of revenge for the destruction of our old homeworld, but along the way we captured a load of footage from this big enemy empire, showing off various space stations they have here and there, and our commanders decide to plot a course through the galaxy that avoids these gigantic space stations, because we still want more revenge. We're going to go into this enemy empire and just try to hammer them some more. I think we're playing things very risky by trying to actually go after this enemy and try to conduct a war with the guys who just wiped out 99% of our military capacity. We're still winning, guys. Let's attack them. I don't know, it feels like maybe we should go and hide somewhere, and to some extent we're going to do that because we decide to teleport to some potentially hidden location to get some more cash, and by cash I mean rocks in space. The problem is though, these rocks in space aren't as stationary as the other ones we've been picking up before. So we have this interesting almost gimmick stage where you're just on a map where the resources are moving towards you and they can actually damage you if they hit you, so you have to shoot the asteroids to sort of break them up into smaller stationary pieces. And there is an interesting subtlety to how you're supposed to do this that essentially screwed me over. This is something that's hard to show because I barely saw it in the campaign. I didn't notice that this problem was happening until right at the end. Well, essentially, the asteroids, while they're moving, can absolutely take out your fighters. And if you order the fighters to attack them, the pathfinding isn't quite there, and they'll somewhat commonly just fly into the asteroids by going in really close to do bombing runs. And as I said that, I've actually lost 2 of my bombers. You might have just about seen it, it was actually on the screen, them dying, but when they're not selected, it's virtually impossible to see what a unit's doing. So anyway, I didn't notice that I was taking these losses for ages, because as you can see on the bottom right, I'm also building things continuously throughout the stage. So I didn't really notice that my stockpile of units I was using to attack the asteroids was going down much, because it was constantly being replenished from the stuff I was building, and I didn't really cotton on to the fact it wasn't building up fast enough, as fast as it should be, until later. And the long and short of it is that after a very long time fighting the asteroids, I've barely made any progress. We collected loads of resources and also lost loads of resources worth of fighters to do it. Essentially, you just have to use the bigger ships to take them out. That's much safer because they don't get so close to them while attacking. And we have done it the other way, the worst way. This is a case where you might be asking, why not just restart the stage and do it again the correct way? Well, the OFFID house rules, one of the many weird house rules I have for making my footage more dramatic and interesting, is that everything is as Iron Man-y as possible. So if there are major problems that arise from the game itself or me not understanding the game, we're going to see, is it still possible to get through? And this is an interesting game because it has this feedback loop thing. Being sucky, making terrible decisions in these early stages, really can ruin the whole thing, and it's almost an experiment to see how much of a problem it's going to be as we go along. Eventually we are through the asteroids, we get another visit from the potentially alien Bentusi guys. They sell us the ability to make drone frigates, which is a unit I haven't liked so far because I'm not quite sure how they work or whether they work. Well anyway, there are still asteroids on the field, so we could harvest them, and I've even got some probes out there, designed to just put them into line of sight, taking into account this rule from earlier that we need to see as much of the field as possible. Although for whatever reason, when I warped out of that map, we didn't take the resources with us, so I guess it doesn't always work like that. Well, we've now warped to a location that the Bentusi tipped us off about, a place where our enemy empire, the Tidan, are afraid to go. So we decided to go and hide here for a bit to build up some resources. But of course there might be some reason why the Tidan empire doesn't come here. We didn't really think of that basically, and it turns out there is another power at large in this nebula, a sort of religious style faction who obsessively kill anybody who comes here unless you surrender to them. We are not given the option to surrender in the plot, our guys refuse to surrender, so now we have to fight whoever these guys are, and they use this cutscene to bring their units close to us, a very sneaky strategy. Now this faction we're facing, I don't remember what they're called, but basically they specialize in fighters. They have loads of fighters all over the place. And, well, that means it's not so good that in the last stage I lost a massive number of my own fighters because I actually have very few left to start the stage, and we're immediately overwhelmed in this first encounter. And of course what fighters I do have will get killed quickly. My plan was to send all of my bombers to run through the fight to the other side where the enemy mothership is just sort of floating around. I thought maybe if we take out the big one, the little ones will stop attacking us. That's a classic thing that sometimes happens in media. Well, in this case, we're not going to have much luck because we don't have enough bombers to deal with that large mothership, and our bombers are going to be swarmed by the enemy fighters as they go in, so that attack mission will not be especially successful, unfortunately for us. You can also note there's this sort of gimmick on these maps that your sensors don't work, so we have these attack pings and random UI things going on all over the place, making it a little bit harder to tell what's going on the, in my opinion, superior tactical map. I ended up trying to focus down the enemy mothership with my larger ships, while the enemy fighters just attack us. We have a lot of time because the fighters aren't very good against the capital ships or the frigates, so it takes them a long time to kill them, but we can barely kill them back because the frigates have weapons that aren't accurate enough basically to take down the enemy fighters. So we're still being swarmed. We don't really have enough cash to do anything about it. I've made a few new fighters that are just getting shot at as they come out of the mothership. We're kind of stuck here, although we don't have to defeat this force. The objective was to survive for 8 minutes while we charge up our hyperdrive and then we can just leave. We are given though the secondary objective we see here of actually getting the resources we came here to steal. This enemy faction doesn't like that we're harvesting the nebula. I don't know what it means for us to be harvesting the nebula, but our ships go out and pick up the scraps of gas and bring them back to make ships with somehow, and that's angering our enemies. So while we're supposed to be protecting our resource collectors and bringing in the cash in this fashion, it's not really going to happen because you can see at the top there, when I have collectors out away from the mothership, they just get absolutely swarmed by the enemy fighters that are all over the place. They're more all over the place than it looks because our sensors aren't working either, so we can't really see where most of them are. But they're vaguely surrounding us. We're pretty much stuck here. Here I am losing a collector that almost made it back with some cash. So our mission to build up resources here has not gone very well, and I suspect it might have gone a bit better if we'd started this mission with millions of fighters, which I might have done if I'd noticed that thing about the asteroids before, so there's a possible example of the knock-on effects of everything. We are eventually allowed to leave, because even after the time limit was up, you actually couldn't jump away for a bit because there was some sort of fake out thing where it said there's an inhibitor field that stops us from jumping away, we have to find and destroy it. But then it suddenly says, well, the inhibitor field has disappeared, so now we can jump away. So it's time to leave, and I thought, rather than bringing in the ships, where they might actually get shot at on the way in, we need to use this quick dock thing that teleports the ships to us. So, again, it seems like a sort of quality of life feature that actually gives you a distinct gameplay advantage. We avoid being attacked on the way back, I presume anyway, by using that feature. So we escape, and we actually do get loads of resources at the end because we could see so many, so that's useful. Now we learn in the cutscene afterwards that the mothership that was attacking us has similar hyperspace engine design to us, which I think is a lore hint that this group living in the nebula has had something happen to them that's whatever happened to us, where we've sort of got split off from the rest of the galaxy and forgotten about everything, and now we're just doing our own thing. Well, they appear to have had the same fate. Perhaps the Empire was at work there as well. Our goal was to jump out of the nebula, but unfortunately we're still in the nebula in the next stage because that inhibitor field really wasn't gone, and we can't leave. We have to actually defeat the enemy to leave, so that's what the next stage is about. We need to actually win this fight, pretty much the same fight we were in before, although this time we've unlocked the multi-gun corvette, a ship that specializes in taking down fighters. I'm building lots of other things that are vaguely good against fighters, but after a while I decided to go with the new thing, the multi-gun corvette, which I guess is better against fighters in some way. We don't have numbers on that. What I really need is salvage corvettes, because here I'm being attacked by these tiny little frigates that it would be nice and probably quite easy to just take them out of the fight and bring them onto my side, especially because I'm feeling very underpowered right now, lacking units. I feel like you're probably supposed to have more units at this stage in the campaign than we do. Well, we have an okay time against the enemy fighters, mainly just because it takes them a long time to kill you, or kill the larger ships. So while we've lost all of our small ships, if I put out some slightly bigger things, we'll have more time, and the bigger things are mainly going to try and shoot, well, for now, this fuel pod that's next to the mothership, and then the mothership itself. I wasn't really sure what was going on with the fuel pods, but looking back at the footage, what appears to be happening is that if you take them out, it does area of effect damage. Like right there, the mothership kind of moves after we take out the fuel pod as if it was taking a shockwave of damage or something. Well, I don't quite know, but it's time for us to take out this big thing. This isn't so difficult because while it's a big imposing looking enemy ship, it doesn't really do very much by the looks of things. I think its main feature is that it produces and spits out those swarmer fighters. But at this stage we're kind of ignoring the swarmer fighters and just trying to focus down the mothership, and I'm putting those multi-gun corvettes around the place and hoping they'll go on to attack the enemy. Maybe they will, but essentially we stopped taking losses at some point and now we're actually doing serious damage back to the enemy, so things are somehow beginning to resolve. It does turn out though that there are 3 of those things to take out before we can leave. So we took out that first one I was attacking earlier, the other one is behind us back there. But you can see there's not that much going on anymore, so things are manageable. They are still producing those fighters, but as I said, they're not very effective against us. And another thing I noticed happening is that they often wandered off on their own. They didn't join the fight always, they just went off into the corner somewhere, never to be seen again. So I don't really know what's going on. I also finally worked out how to repair my ships, a useful thing to know. I did know you could repair them, but the thing about the repair functionality is that you have to manually select the corvettes that do the repairs and then manually select the targets. You can't say just assign repair ships to a group and just say repair this group whenever it's damaged, which is the ideal setup. But it turns out you can almost do that. You can put all of your repair ships on a control group, and then you can give them a band box order, like with the band box attacking orders before, to repair a group of ships, and it will go through one by one doing all of the repairs. So while this won't repair damage as you go along in the fight, if you keep giving the order over and over again, it sort of will. So that's something. We're going to have fewer casualties among the large ships now knowing this, and I'm going to use the repair ships a bit more often. I'm also using these salvage corvettes here because I wanted to take the enemy's fuel pods that were floating here near the final mothership. I thought maybe you would get something if you do this. Well, I'm pretty sure you just get a fuel pod, which you can't use for anything, so that's useful. So we go on in to fight the final thing. It wasn't very defended at all. I'm guessing the enemy did have a budget and they ran out of money because they stopped sending ships at us, and our little group eventually worked through all of them. And we do complete the stage, just with basically all of the fleet lost and a new, slightly more competently organised fleet beginning to be rebuilt in its place. Although I did then waste a load of time because of this anomaly objective marker on the sensor screen, which turned out to just be a glitch in the sensors caused by the nebulas, so I wasted some time going to look at that. They got me there, they bamboozled me. So after that we'll just leave basically, and we'll take half of the nebula with us as money as well. We learn on the way out a bit more about who those people we just killed were, probably the best time to look into that after they're dead. They were also, I think, exiled by the Empire that exiled us and is trying to kill us now. They weren't allowed to do hyperspace, I suppose, as well, and they ended up just hanging out in this nebula, killing everybody who came close, and building up their own little pirate realm. And then eventually they got religious about it and became obsessed with killing anyone who showed up, and that's why they were so mean to us when we showed up. Well, they're dead now, so I suppose that's the end of that story. A bit of a side story really, and so is the next thing that happens in the game. We detect a mysterious alien ship wandering about nearby and go to investigate. In order to investigate / destroy whatever we're doing here, the mysterious ghost ship as it's called, we have to fight a small fleet of enemies nearby, which wasn't too bad. I thought we could just plow through this with our block of bigger ships. I was trying to send the salvage corvettes forwards during the firefight to cheekily steal the enemy ships because they looked good to me, but But this fails for two reasons. Firstly, the enemy ships turn and just start destroying the salvage corvettes, which is always the risk with this plan. I guess it just straight up doesn't work sometimes. You need the AI to be nice to you for this to work, essentially. But there's a bigger problem you can see. A lot of our ships suddenly start attacking us. It turns out this is another gimmick stage, where if you go too close to the ghost ship, you lose control of your ships and it then controls them against you. The only way to get around this is to use fighters, because fighters aren't affected by whatever's doing this. So we lose essentially everything once again. I'm left with just the fighters. I can use them to go and attack the ghost ship in the end, but in the background you might notice there that all of the stuff we lost to the ghost ship just went over to our mothership and started blowing it up, and our attacks against the ghost ship were doing basically nothing as well. So we got completely obliterated big time. That's the end of the pure Iron Man segment of this run, I suppose. We died here to a mysterious ghost ship. Well, luckily we can go back in time and try it again, now knowing what the gimmick is. And instead, I sent only fighters and bombers to go around the map and attack from a different direction. We can just leave all of our big ships at home and presume they're going to be out of range of the ghost ship's mysterious effects, and try to take it out with this little assault group. What I was wondering though as I came in was, should I first attack the other ships nearby? We're slightly hampered here, by the way, by the fact it shows you a cutscene of the ship when you get close, and our fighters are already being destroyed during the cutscene. It all happens in real time and you just lose control, so those cutscenes are a little bit inconvenient. Anyway, the question was, should I take out those other ships? Because while it would be easy enough to do so, what I wanted to do is just defeat the ghost ship, which would then leave everything else sitting here vulnerable to being captured. I'm still very eager to build my fleet up by capturing stuff when I can. But when I saw how slowly the health bar on the ghost ship was going down, I thought this probably isn't going to happen, and in particular that enemy missile destroyer, which just launches homing missiles, is completely battering our fighter swarm, since the missiles just follow them round and constantly get hits. So we focus down these ships instead, and I end up going through and taking out all of them, unfortunately, just to keep this fighter group alive because we were taking moderate damage. Then we eventually destroy the ghost ship down to a point when it says the effect is not going to be there and it's safe for us to get closer to this ship. What we had to do was capture something from the ship using a salvage corvette. What I couldn't do, and what I tried to do for a long time, wasting time, was actually capture the entire thing and use it for something. We eventually come away with some information that reveals the ship is millions of years old, but otherwise we don't know what it's doing. It comes with this technology, essentially, because the Bentusi traders show up and they want the data on this millions of years old ship, and they trade it for information on how to make gigantic ships. So now we can build capital ships, I think, from the mothership, although we don't have any cash, so we actually can't do it. The idea is there, though. More importantly, the plot returns, because the Bentusi promise they can take this matter of us being hunted by the Empire to the Council. There is supposedly some sort of higher legislative body in the Empire that might feel sorry for us and decide to let us be a hyperspacing civilization without that being considered a violation of the law and whatnot. So maybe they'll sort that out for us in the background. Now, while our friends try to negotiate peace with the Empire, we're going to make things difficult for them by attacking the Empire. We come to the conclusion, based on nothing at all as far as I can tell, that there is a place at the border of this enemy empire where it's not very defended and we can probably break through. Not sure how you have to break through the border of a space empire, but anyway, we've come here to somewhere to destroy an enemy space station and then carry on our way into this enemy empire to exact our revenge. But the local environment is exacting plenty of revenge on us, as we can see here. As I send my ships out, they just sort of die. So the gimmick on this stage is that most of the map has a radiation field of some kind that kills you if you go into it. And the solution to that are these streaks you can see on the map. There are areas that are dusty, and if you're inside the dust, you're okay. So we have to use these channels of dust to reach the enemy on the other side of the map. The problem is the money is off in separate sections, so you have to cross the radiation zone to get to the cache. For that, we're going to use that tech we just got off of the Bentusi allied aliens, the super heavy tech that allows us to make carriers. Carriers are basically small, mobile motherships. I should add, by the way, in case anyone was wondering, the mothership, while it actually is displayed as having engines on it, doesn't move, which is Not that interesting, I think. It might be more interesting if it could move around. Here's the master plan then. We'll put our resource collectors into the carriers, which have enough health to cross the radiation zones without dying. The issue we faced here is that the carriers come with this auto-launch mode enabled by default. This means anything you put into them will automatically just come straight back out, which is not all that useful. Here it is actually on the screen. I almost noticed it and turned that mode off. Instead, I struggled, constantly trying to put the resource collectors into the carrier, thinking maybe they weren't allowed to go inside this thing. But no, the carrier can hold quite a lot of stuff, as it turns out. The whole space and time issue has been solved by our civilization, so our mothership and carriers can carry way more than it looks like they can. Eventually, I worked it out and the carrier heads off towards the cache. Meanwhile, our fleet is having to very carefully move up this column of dust. It's difficult to tell your fleet to go to a specific place in space, as I think I mentioned before, and this is the stage where that really becomes a problem. Here we are though, we've got our resource collectors over here at these asteroids, there's no radiation here, and the carrier counts as a resource drop-off point, so that little setup can just do its thing over there. We're being slightly attacked in the dust column. This mine layer corvette was a bit of a annoying one because it goes near you, drops a mine, but then the mines sort of magnetically levitate towards you, so you can't really avoid the mines once they're dropped anywhere near you. Anyway, here's a bit of drama with our resource collectors because one of them went out of the asteroid's dust cloud. It was following my carrier trying to drop resources off there, but I need them to instead drop them off at the resource controller, which is that ship at the top left there. A ship that just processes your cache, and I've put that there to sort that out, so the carrier can come and join the main battle group, which is engaging in some battle. Further down the column there are some enemy capital ships hanging about. Now of course I'm thinking, can I steal these ships? The problem is, with them fighting at long range, it's harder to sneak in the salvager corvettes and just take the enemy from the midst of battle, because your things are more likely to die. And my solution to that was to swarm in fighters and bombers in a first wave to kind of distract the enemy. This basically works. We steal that destroyer there, but I don't have enough corvettes to steal the cruiser on the left, because as it turns out, 4 isn't enough. You need 6 to steal these things, so those 4 will go in and basically die. The cruiser is potentially unique, I can't quite tell, in that while you're salvaging it, it can shoot the corvettes off the side of itself. Its guns can arc to really close range like that. It's not going to happen right here because the cruiser's already targeting something else, and I think the way it seems to work is once the enemy starts targeting you, it kind of keeps shooting at the same ship until it dies, so you can do some effective tanking here if you really bothered to make your formation such that your stronger ships were out front, but I wasn't really bothering to do that. So we end up having to destroy that cruiser, and we're now kind of above the objective area. That's where this column of dust led us to. There are loads of ships down there that have come up to fight, and we're fortunate here in that the way the dust actually works is a bit different to how it looks like it works. So while we sort of have to leave the dust to go down towards the objective from here, there's a column where there isn't any radiation, so the game's been a bit generous here, and we're able to move down from almost directly above where we're supposed to go and not die on the way. There were loads of fighters defending this place, but they were easy enough to deal with. There was also a carrier, and this carrier is supposed to be a bit of a challenge, I suppose. It spits out absolutely loads of units right in front of you, loads of corvettes as well, some of the bigger types of strike craft. However, I have a gravity well generator in my fleet. That was the unit we unlocked by researching that alien ship in the last stage. I didn't really know what to do with it, so I just had it switched on in the middle of my main fleet to see what would happen. And it turns out it disables all of those strike craft as they come out of the corvette, so they just don't do anything. They float awkwardly there. The rest of the enemy's fighters are floating awkwardly trying to defend their research station, and they don't seem to aggro onto me as I'm getting close, so that's good. I just take them all out at range, and then indeed take out the research station as well. So that's the main objective of the stage done. However, we were given another main objective just now, which was to take out the carrier, because the Tidan are trying to escape on the carrier, and they might warn their friends about our shenanigans here. Well, I suppose they don't have radio communication or something, so they have to go in person, a very inefficient space empire. The thing is, I don't want to take out that carrier, because I wanted to steal it. It's a very easy steal. However, it's actually drifted just outside of the safe zone, and we see the difficulties with the dust not being represented really. The left side of the screen is in the safe zone, the right side of the screen isn't. So by going out to grab this carrier, our corvettes start to die, and we have to call off the operation. I think they just about make it out, and then we'll start shooting at the carrier once again. Interestingly, the AI kind of notices when you're trying to take a carrier, so while I had some salvage corvettes on the way to the carrier, our ships weren't firing at it, but once the mission is cancelled, they'll start firing at it again. So good to see there's some intelligence there. I think it's doing what it needs to do. We end up blowing up the carrier, and I thought that would be the end of the stage, but it isn't, and we can check in the objectives here to see that we actually have to destroy everything in the system and the carrier. Also, the details for these objectives are the wrong way round. They're attached to the wrong primary objectives, which is the first sign that something suspicious is going on here, and indeed something suspicious is going on. But for now, all I know is there's an enemy somewhere on this map that I have to kill to complete the destroy all enemies objective, and it's probably somewhere in the dust that I didn't go to, so it's time for a very long adventure. Here we are, 4 minutes later, I managed to get down to the next tier of dust cloud, and we see now a clear example of why it's difficult to move around in a 3D space with an angled camera. You can't tell where you're telling the objective marker to go. You sort of have to put it down somewhere and then rotate the camera to see it from different views to estimate where it actually is in the 3D space. And eventually you'll get one that looks good enough to let the fleet take that path. Fortunately, these dust clouds are mostly linear, and some of them are all even on the same plane, so you don't have to do so much uppy-downy movement. But when you do have to do uppy-downy movement, as I believe the mathematicians call it, it causes issues. So we skip ahead another 10 minutes or so with just straight up nothing happening. I ended up sending out a scout ship to do this searching of the dust a little bit faster. What I wanted to do was find a little group of enemies somewhere, so that I could send the main fleet there and not have to spend ages searching all of the area with the main fleet. But I ended up not seeing anything with the scout, so that didn't really give me any clues about what to do now. There are such a thing as cloaked units in this game, although I don't know if there are any on this map. Here I am once again trying to keep the fleet alive as they accidentally drifted out of a dust cloud while I was trying to move them somewhere or other. And we're getting towards the end of having been everywhere on the map now. I think I've already looked everywhere at least once, and I was looking again because, of course, the enemy could be moving around, so I ideally need to see most of the map most of the time to actually know if there are enemies on the map. But my conclusion now is that there probably weren't any enemies on the map, and we are stuck in a glitch. This would be a game-breaking glitch because I can't progress, but since you'll probably notice this video has more time in it, I did eventually find a way to get around this situation. But for the meantime, I was just adrift, just wandering around this map, looking for anything that could help me here with nowhere else to go and nothing in particular to do, which I think in terms of a literary analysis of the plight of the Homeworld exiles, the whatever we people are calling ourselves, it's sort of here in the game in mechanical form, unintentionally, we're experiencing the despair of being alone in a cosmos that hates you. And I think that's probably the most generous way we can interpret what's happening here. Not intentional, but I think it sort of fit. I hated this, presumably as much as the people hate not having their homeworld, so we'd better get it for them. I eventually figured the only way we're getting through this is if I can cheat to just finish the stage now and move on. But the cheats for the game, looked up here on GameFAQs, a classic site, are not very useful. They're just technical testing things for the most part. We don't have any gameplay cheats. So while I was there, I went in the walkthrough section and found this stage to see if there was something I didn't do or something like that. Well, it looks like there isn't, but the long and short of me reading this text is that the guy's recommended strategy was the thing that I feared was the best strategy, where you basically tank the enemy and distract them and then constantly use your salvage corvettes to get all of their ships. And I was just annoyed to sort of confirm this by reading the official walkthrough from some guy. Some guy recommends playing like that. Well, I don't want to, as I've said before, and we're not really going to be doing that. The next possibility I found for cheating was that the part of your save file which determines what you start a stage with is very simple in its structure, so you can open it up in a text editor and just copy-paste sections to give yourself more ships when you restart the stage. And I thought maybe if I just restart the stage with loads of ships to make it easy, that would help. The problem is, because of the annoying "you die if you leave the dust" gimmick, that's not really an option. So we end up with the new-fashioned way of cheating. We've got Cheat Engine, a hacks program, and fortunately somebody had made a GOG version compatible cheat table. That means we can go into the stage with God mode enabled and just try it again to see if it works this time. So now we can't take any damage, life is a bit easier. I've sent my scouts to just very slowly defeat the enemy fleet at the other end of the map while the rest of the stuff catches up. Going there early triggers the carrier, the objective carrier, to spawn very early. It then wandered off on its own and got captured, so this time we do get the carrier. And now we can see our icons are fighting the enemy icons. Since we can't take damage, we don't need to really attend to this. Eventually we'll destroy the fleet that's here, and part of the objective will be done. But in the meantime, we've got an important game to play. I wanted to see what happens when you take the carrier back to your mothership, what it actually does to it. It looks like it just eats it up, but it does not quite fit in the gap there. We have got an enormous technical glitch in Homeworld Remastered. They should have remastered the carriers to be slightly smaller or something. Well, it pops back out, still not really fitting, and it's a different colour too when it comes back out, and the algorithm is loving all of this commentary, I'm sure. We've got the carrier, we don't need it at all, we already have two, and I don't really need two of those either. Well, the next fun thing to do was see if the enemy cruiser, which I also stole, would fit in the mothership. You can see there we have some camera issues, so there's some more jank going on here. The cruiser is sort of fatter but shorter, so it just about fits in. And yes, algorithm, that is what I meant. You can take that as you like. We've got a cruiser. This is a more useful acquisition because we haven't unlocked the ability to make these. I think these are like the end game ship. They're just good against other big ships for long-range combat, and now we have one. But what we don't have is a way out of the stage. We are still trapped here. It still didn't complete the objective when I blew up everything this time. I had this genius idea, though, that's going to get us out of this one. I thought, what if I select my entire fleet except for the mothership, and then click the scuttle button, which just kills all of your units? Yes, that completes the stage. So what's up with that? Well, it's hard to say. I'm guessing that some of the enemy units I captured were considered to still be part of the active enemy fleet for the destroy the enemy fleet objective. So by deleting all of my units, I've ensured that that's no longer the case. However, I now have no units. Luckily, because we have Cheat Engine running, all of the units you can build are free, so I can essentially just sit back here in the end game of this stage and make a new fleet. This is going to completely obliterate the legitimacy of the persistent fleet idea running through the game. I'm just going to give myself, essentially, a nearly maxed out fleet, I seem to recall. I couldn't be bothered to max it out because it takes a long time, but I gave myself a good fleet. So this is my reward for putting up with the game's hassle. I should note that while it's not obvious due to cutting, of the roughly 6 hours spent playing the game up to this point, 2 of them-ish were in this stage. So this stage is completely different to the rest. Not obvious at all because I wasn't showing you how it takes 20 minutes to move your stuff from one side of the map to the other, and it's arduous as well with the dust cloud things. I hated this stage passionately, much worse than everything that came before, and indeed everything I've seen so far that comes after. I don't know what's up with this stage, and the fact that we had this glitch that we couldn't even leave the stage after completing it twice, no less. Well, this was going to be a game-ending and game-damning glitch that I was just going to complain about and then end the video, but luckily my own guile of just pressing delete somehow allows me to get through this, so we are going to see some more of the game as it turns out, and it does improve after this very large stumbling block. After the stage, we have this intercepted transmission of a guy who claims to be the Emperor of the enemy empire. I'm not sure it is a guy though, because it appears to be a robot head. Kind of reminds me of GLaDOS, although of course this came before. Well, maybe the guy we're fighting isn't AI. It's not necessarily relevant and it's never mentioned again, but there's a fun side detail. One of the many lore details that seems to exist in the game that I don't think is utilised to its full potential, or utilised at all even. Well anyway, we move on to the next stage, which is the most merciful stage in the game. After that horrible, long, and difficult stage, we come into what is perhaps the shortest and one of the easiest stages. It all takes place on one screen, effectively. You just spawn next to one of our Bentusi allies who's being attacked by just a few ships with no fighter cover, and you just have to save your ally. But of course, all these big heavy ships sitting here, already aggroed onto something else, well, that's a perfect time to just go and send in the salvage corvettes to start stealing them. So I was hesitant to really attack them here, and we'll start making some steals. One other thing I'll note while I'm here, by the way, is that every time you start a stage, all of your units are set to the sort of fire at will off mode, the passive behavior mode, where they don't attack nearby enemies. This is enabled at the end of each stage, and it carries through to the beginning of each stage because of that. Which means, if you are fighting right at the start, your units won't fire at the enemy and you have to quickly go around and turn on this mode. And I can't see any gameplay reason why it's like that. They don't need to be set onto passive mode at the end of stages when nothing's happening anyway. So whatever, we save our allies here, and they decide to tell us the forbidden law, which is barely anything as it turns out. They tell us that we used to have an empire, but we were defeated by the other guys, and they exiled a few survivors from our culture to go and live on the planet we were at the start of the game, which I thought was Earth, but apparently wasn't. We know so little about that planet that, again, the lore is almost irrelevant. There is actually a prequel to this game, though, that explains what's going on with that planet as far as I know, so I might check that out sometime. So anyway, we basically didn't really learn anything from the forbidden law. We certainly learned nothing I hadn't already learned by cheekily looking at the wiki by now, so that's a shame. Something's going on, and it could be quite interesting if they mentioned a bit more of what it was. So for the next stage, we start jumping towards our homeworld, hoping to reclaim it somehow, but on the way we're pulled out of hyperspace by a gravity well or something it mentions, and we have this brief gimmick battle where our fighters can't move and we have to blow up some enemy ships, but most of those enemy ships are support frigates, which either have no or very few offensive options. So we just sort of sit here absolutely annihilating them. Our big block of capital ships can overpower anything at this stage because they have great range and firepower, so we don't have to do very much to defeat the enemy. But there is another enemy fleet somewhere we have to go and hunt down elsewhere on the map. I had seen it and then pulled back because I wanted to try a raid tactic here. We're going to hold back and first send in this wave of bombers. I'm going to first try to take out this cloak generator, which is stopping us from seeing these guys at a long distance. We succeed in that, and what I thought I would do is jump out the other side of the fleet. The pursuing fighters would go back to guard their capital ships, and then I could raid again and take out another large ship, and just try that as a tactic. Well, it doesn't work at all because we just permanently aggro the enemy fighter cloud and they end up following us back towards our fleet, and we just engage in battle. Most of the bombers were lost, and it certainly wasn't worth the trade to take out that cloak generator. So anyway, now it's fighting time, and I quite like this view of the fight when you just see the triangles and the little contact pings going off. It feels somehow more interesting to watch it like this than to see it on the regular map view where the actual ships are shooting at each other. This somehow feels more sci-fi and more immersive because this is more like what somebody on the mothership controlling the battle would see. And when you look at the battle in the 3D rendered view, I guess it's just not that interesting to look at, and it's sort of hard to control the camera as well, which I've ranted about already, and basically I just kind of like the colourful shapes shooting at each other. And if you've seen a lot of my commentaries on games, you might notice that's a recurring theme. I like it when the graphics are really basic but are representing something that's quite complex, because usually the real graphics to represent that complex thing will be disappointing. My imagination is better than your graphics developers, so just show me the colourful shapes and I'll do the rest, or just do nothing, that's fine by me as well. So basically some triangles fight, and our triangles win, which is always good. I then tried to take an enemy carrier that was sitting nearby. Unfortunately, my ships blew it up before the corvettes got there. Potentially one feature we need then is that for enemies you have targeted with your corvettes, they won't draw aggro from your units because it knows you're trying to take them. It does that, as mentioned earlier, after you've started taking them, but not during the run-up to taking them. And it probably should, because you also have to not kill them before they get there for the salvage thing to work, so that would make sense. After going off onto the map looking for enemy ships, it eventually bamboozles us by hitting us with a fleet coming from the other direction that attacks the mothership. So we were potentially in trouble, but as it turned out, our ships gradually got back and easily defeated the enemy, and the mothership didn't die. I fully expected the mothership to die and me to have to restart the stage and leave half the fleet behind or something to prepare for that attack. but we just got away with it and everything was fine, and our fleet is looking good. There was then a little final section where a rebel Tidan ship appears. The Empire we're fighting is starting to break up a tiny bit, and one of the rebel ships is here. We protect them from a few enemy ships that are coming in from the north, although I was, during the fight, more concerned with setting up for my post-stage plan. That is, I need to get ship to go out and scout all of the resources on the map and put probes down, ready for the quick exit with all the cash. So we save that guy, and he tells us that basically there's going to be a big rebellion, but he needs to do something to make it happen, and this would help us out. So we're going to go with him to this mysterious location where there is some sort of beacon we can light to start a rebellion against the Empire, and that will probably help us out. This brings us to the next stage, which was an unusual stage, I guess. We have this map that's covered in debris, so it's kind of slow and hard to move around here, and there are tiny enemy turrets everywhere that don't really do very much damage, so they're of irrelevant combat potential, but we just constantly stop and shoot at them as we progress through the map. And early on it says this: we've lost contact with one of our capital ships. Its last recorded position is here, with no position located, so I don't know what was meant by that, and we don't appear to have lost any of our capital ships. So what I suspect is that something more was supposed to be going on this stage, and maybe we've got a glitch in our favour. Perhaps someone in the comments can let us know. Essentially, all I did was go from the right side of the screen to the left, really slowly, constantly expecting to be ambushed or something to go wrong, or for there to be some reason I'd have to quickly go back. Well, there wasn't one. We just get to the left side of the screen, and the rebellion starts with almost no combat, no threat, and it really felt like something was supposed to happen in this stage. Why is it even here? Maybe they just wanted to be nice to us and give us a really easy stage so we could build up our resources or something, because that is something you need to take into account when you're making your positive feedback loop-based game. You need to have these safety valves where if people have got quite far in the game but maybe don't have enough fleet to do the next stage, you might want to put in a stage that's sort of easy where you're unlikely to lose anything, and give the player a chance to collect resources and build back up towards the pop cap, that sort of thing. We're already close enough thanks to cheating, so we don't really have to do that, but we had the opportunity to do so on this stage, I guess. That might be what's going on here, or maybe we're just missing something, as I said. Well, whatever the case, we've done this level. We still can't quite go to our homeworld, because there is this massive array of things that stops you from jumping towards it. Here is one of the things. And there's another questionable section where we have a 2-minute long no voiceover cutscene showing the thing spinning in space, which made me think something was supposed to be happening during the cutscene. Well, towards the end of it, it shows us a ship leaving this circular area and sort of pans towards it before the cutscene fades out. And I thought, was I supposed to have some dialogue here? Is this supposed to imply something about this ship that it's focusing on? Which I think is just a resource collector, so it's collecting resources on the other side of the map for the enemy faction. I don't know what that was. Well, anyway, we have to go over there and take out that thing, and it's actually not going to be too hard. I suppose I'm just paranoid after the mission before this too. It seems like something could be missing in this campaign, I'm not quite sure. Well, we do face these hyperspace gates, and these were also in the last stage, but in that stage, they were just enemies that you could blow up and they didn't do anything. In this stage, when you attack them, they actually spawn enemies to attack you, so that's perhaps a clue that something similar was supposed to be happening in the previous stage. Or maybe this was a ploy. They were in the previous stage in an inert form to make you think they weren't a risk, and then they appear in their active form in this stage to lure you into a trap. Could be something like that. Well, whatever the case, we face a swarm of enemy units that's coming out behind our fleet, so we sort of have to go back. Otherwise, the enemy might go for the mothership, although I'm actually not helping by leading them towards the mothership with the fighters they're pursuing there. We don't have to be doing that. Oh well. And we're being attacked from the left as well. But I've got my fleet control grouped up in such a way that we can quite easily organise various strikes in different directions, and the rest of the stage is pretty easy, because while there are loads of enemy units on this map, they're all separated out, very evenly spaced throughout the map, just hanging out, not really doing anything. They don't attack you unless you get really close to them, so we can leave most of them alive and just completely focus down and destroy the ones that we do encounter. Sometimes they're above you, as we can see here with the camera rotation. Not always obvious from the top-down view, that stuff can be quite far above or below you and look really close to you on that map. Just more 3D issues. We reach another hyperspace gate and take it out. There was a carrier here too. I think that carrier is just hanging out in this corner because there are some resources here and the resource collectors can use the carriers as drop-off points. So we essentially just steal this completely undefended carrier. I don't think carriers have any weapons, so you can just send in the corvettes to steal it immediately. Thank you very much, and that will also stop the enemy getting resources. I suppose that means they could be building units against us, but not anymore if they were doing that. And most of the units they do have, as I mentioned, are not a threat in practice, because even though they could probably win if they swarmed us down, they don't, which is a classic AI thing. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing, it probably sounds like I'm criticizing it. Many AIs are deliberately designed like that because that's how video games work. You overcome big challenges by doing lots of small and easy challenges one after the other, essentially. But if it was a multiplayer game, for example, we would be screwed. Here I was taking a close-up look at our ships, which I hadn't really done very much so far. It's one of these things where, I've said this several times before when commenting, especially on space games, because the game is so often played from a perspective where you can't see your units or can't see them very well, like this one right here, is it even worth the resources, the development time of making 3D model ships? I said this about Distant Worlds 2 and AI Wars 2 I think as well. It's sort of essential from a production point of view because you need it to make your not quite fake screenshots where you can advertise the game as being something where you look at cool ships even if you actually don't, because technically you can, so it's not quite false advertising, a sort of Total War style strategy to marketing you might say. Well, I suppose I don't really appreciate it anymore, at least. I sort of think, what could they have done if they didn't have to make those models? What else would we have in the game? Would it be better because of that? Well, who knows. As for the end of this stage, we go towards the thing, it's just sort of here, and we blow it up. And again, I'm left wondering, was there supposed to be a boss that comes out of it or something? Was all of this leading up to something more challenging than effectively nothing? This is just trivial busy work at this stage, blowing up all the different parts of the thing one by one while it can't fight back. Well, eventually we've destroyed the thing, and we can jump a bit closer to our homeworld. We're still not quite there though, because we are interrupted by a gigantic rock. This old problem again, we're back at it again fighting rocks. This rock is actually a very sci-fi thing. The enemy empire has attached a bunch of engines to a giant rock, so they can just throw it at us. And that's a really hard sci-fi weapon, because yes, if you put an engine on a small stone, you can turn it into a nuke in space because you're constantly building up momentum. You can just accelerate a lump for 10 years and it will gain so much energy that it probably will be as effective as any weapon you could devise, a straight up lump of silicon rocks. Well, here we are in the future, not just facing rocks but a few actual enemy ships which are far less effective of course. I'm trying to steal these ships with the corvettes again because they're sort of exposed, but for whatever reason I was finding it difficult to latch onto them. Sometimes when you mouse over a potential target, the icon for taking the ship doesn't appear and you get the icon for just going to sit next to the ship instead, which is what some of our ships have done here. So we have these salvage corvettes that are next to this destroyer. They won't latch onto it to take it. Not quite sure what the rules are here, but we just couldn't. Here's that rock with its engines attached. I was pretty impressed that this was in the game. I was like, yes, another hard sci-fi thing. Although in terms of it being like a boss, I suppose it's pretty easy. We're clearly overpowered or something because we destroy it before it's even halfway across the map. We do have a nearly maxed out fleet, you can see on the left there, the actual pop caps. We can even go over the pop cap by capturing enemy ships. One thing I wondered was it stopping me from salvaging ships because it would take me over the pop cap? Maybe that was the problem I was having. Apparently not, you can go over the pop cap by capturing stuff, so that's good to know. We have our overpowered fleet, and where we are underpowered, where we don't have the pop cap filled up, well, I can just sit there right now and spend some cash to make it so. We're now going into what turned out to be the final stage, although I didn't expect it. We see this short cutscene at the start where we die. The player character, the implied player character, is this woman in the mothership who's controlling everything, and she just dies in a cutscene that appears to have no context or detail whatsoever. Perhaps that's on theme with the game's narrative style of me not really understanding what's going on. It implied that the enemy emperor, who might be a robot, sort of noticed us showing up here and just killed us with some sort of power. So I don't know if that's what's going on. Opens up many questions if he can do that, so who knows what the issue is. but we died. Still, the second character, who doesn't even have a name, the male voice you hear sometimes, tells us that we were just being delayed by the enemy fighting that rock, and they've built up a fleet here at the homeworld. We are finally there, but there's going to be a battle to take it. This is the final battle, as mentioned. I didn't expect it to be so, sort of for plot reasons, but I'll talk about that later. Let's see what we've got in this stage first. They come at us with a couple of attack groups right away from above and below, making use of the vertical space now. Those two groups are easy enough to defeat. The real issue, though, is that they also come at us from the left with a more powerful group. Now, it didn't look powerful enough to take down my fleet, because it's similar to my fleet but a bit smaller, so I thought we'll win in this engagement. However, this enemy fleet isn't necessarily firing at us, it's firing at the mothership first and foremost, and I totally didn't notice. We ended up fighting them close enough that they could be shooting at the mothership throughout the engagement, and I scrolled out just in time to see the mothership explode. So that was unexpected. We suddenly failed. I totally didn't notice at first. So now we have another attempt where now we know they're going to attack the mothership. This time I ordered my repair ships to constantly attend to the mothership and try to keep it alive while everything else takes down the enemy. I'm still trying to use my salvage corvettes at the same time to steal some of these enemy ships, not knowing that this is the final stage in fact, so it's not really going to help us very much. And to some extent that slows down the process of killing the enemy. And once again, even with the repairs going on, we still lose the mothership. We almost did it that time, but not quite. So that's annoying. We're going to try it again. On the third attempt, I tried to bring the fleet a bit further away from the mothership to engage the enemy a tiny bit earlier and get more time to destroy them before they start attacking the mothership. And that's going to help us out. The only downside to doing this is I was less in position to fight the two groups coming from above and below. But the main threat there, the guys from below in frigates, were already dead by the time we were fighting the third group, so this was all fine. The mothership still got attack to load, I'm still trying to repair it. It loses more than half its health, but this time it actually works out. So, we've survived that first gauntlet of stuff. Now we have plenty of time to sit around. I suppose at this stage, the player may need to rebuild their fleet, so not much happens after that. There is the carrier from the attack group above us still sitting there. I was going to go and kill it, but then I thought I'll send my salvage corvettes to steal it since it's unguarded. Again, not realizing that this is sort of a waste of time, but I did it anyway. I wasted my time, and now I'm going to waste your time by telling me about a time that I wasted my time. I am very slowly advancing across the map with the main group at the same time. There's a sensor for us to kill, which takes me a while to click on. After that, though, we had to go back, because once you get to the middle of the map-ish, they come at you with this extra wave from the top corner of the map, very far away, a hard place to get to. We need to rush back and hope we get to the mothership in time before the enemy group does. Our fleet does move very slowly because I think when you group things together into control groups, they automatically move at the speed of the slowest thing in that control group, which is a useful thing, but in this case it means all of our faster ships have to move as slow as the heavy cruisers or whatever is slowing our fleet down. All that said, we do get vaguely back into position before the enemy make their run for the mothership, and we shoot them as they go by, and we also capture a heavy cruiser at the back of their formation. That's a nice steal, but again we don't really need it for this stage as it turns out, or for this game as it turns out. So now we make our second attempt at going towards the left side of the map where the objective is. There's an enemy base and a fleet over there for us to destroy. But we're soon back at the mothership because another wave started coming from the bottom corner of the map, and once again we had to go towards them. It's a case where the map view is misleading again. It looks like they're kind of close to the mothership, but they're actually really far away into the distance, in the depth of the screen, so it takes them a long time to get to us, and we are well in position before they start coming past. And you can see, because they're not aggroing onto us, because they're going for the mothership, they end up being pretty defenseless and just get blasted as they go past our fleet's big guns, and they're not going to make it through. There was another heavy cruiser somewhere at the back that I also wanted to steal. I sent the salvage corvettes to do it, but I mentioned before the heavy cruisers can shoot the salvage corvettes off themselves. This is where I learned that by seeing it happen a couple of times. I sent something like 12 corvettes down there, only 5 of them have managed to latch on, and I spent a long time now in the stage sending more and more corvettes, constantly trying to steal that heavy cruiser. I'm going to cut that struggle out because it's very irrelevant. What actually happened while I was doing that was the stage completed itself for me, so that was generous. I think what was going on is the rebels, the enemy empire's rebellion, are also on the map, and they ended up destroying the objective, which I think it said was the Emperor himself in a ship. So I don't know why the enemy Emperor decided to come to the battlefield today, but he just died off screen somewhere, and that means we've completed the game. You might also have noticed there that the main character, Karen, also came back to life. The fleet command who mysteriously died at the beginning of the stage, well, they're back. Maybe the existence of the Emperor was the problem. We've defeated the Emperor, who may be a robot, and now our fleet AI, who also may be a robot but sort of is a human too, is back in time to see the end of the game, where it just said the Council gave us our homeworld back and sort of forcibly ended the rest of the war. Presumably there is still a grander empire that we're going to have trouble with, but the Council says that it's not going to happen, so we're good. We got our homeworld back after all that. It is still presumably populated by this new empire that displaced us, so I guess we'll just rule over them for a bit now and nothing could possibly go wrong. That is indeed the end. And as I mentioned, I was surprised that this was the end because it was such an anticlimactic ending. You would think there'd be at least some sort of boss encounter, especially because they went to the lengths of having the enemy Emperor be on the map. You'd think he would have some sort of massive thing for you to fight, and it would probably be something along the lines of it has an everything-proof shield, and the only way to get through and destroy it is to self-destruct your mothership and lose your hyperdrive. The hyperdrive, the thing that allowed you to first leave your original world, would then be destroyed at the end, which brings some closure, some full circle-ness to the story, and it would blow up the Emperor. The Council can say, well done, you can have this planet in the same way it already does, but we're now trapped on this planet in the same way we were trapped somewhere else earlier, potentially setting up the next game. Well, you don't really need to worry about setting up the next game because you've committed so little to the plot in this game that a sequel can be anything. And there is indeed a sequel to this game, which is included within the same game. The Homeworld remaster is a remaster of Homeworlds 1 and 2 from the past. So there is more, but I'll stop this video here because I switched to playing something else. Although I do intend to also play Homeworld 2 and maybe the de facto Homeworld 3, which is called something like Homeworld's Deserts of Karak, which is a prequel, I believe, so it's Homeworld 0, I suppose. Well, anyway, this is a similar vibe to the ending I got when I played Starship Troopers, another story-based strategy game, where the story isn't enough for me and I'm left wondering what was going on in the broad sense, whether there was supposed to be more, and I suppose even questioning the very idea of the story-based strategy game, because so many of the detailed elements of what make up strategy gameplay are about player choices and unpredictable outcomes, which are two things that are at odds with trying to have a directorial story, a story with an intended purpose and experience. Well, in this game, because it was very linear, I suppose we didn't get too much of that as an issue. It was more that there was no plot, or that I didn't know what the plot was while I was in the game, and I'm just a casual user of the game, so perhaps that means there isn't enough explanation of what's supposed to be going on. Thanks to the existence of a wiki, I know a bit more about what's going on, and it sounds sort of interesting. It sounds like there was a decent amount of lore made for the game that wasn't necessarily used in the game itself. Perhaps that would have been explained in a manual that would come with the book back in the past, when reading the manual was intended. It wasn't a bad thing for your game to not necessarily explain itself because the manual was supposed to do so. There was probably some more to all this, but I did not receive it after playing it, so all I can say is I wish there was more. I felt like the game has strange pacing, empty sections, that one level in the game which is disastrously bad and nearly made me rage quit or be forced to rage quit due to technical difficulties. You could just delete that entirely. It's not at all integral to the game, and the game would be a few hours shorter and probably better feeling overall as a result. But you might want to replace those few hours with explaining what's going on in the general sense, who we are, and the big question I always had in terms of plot was, what do we think about what's going on? I don't know how much I'm supposed to know if I am a character in the world. Does the fleet command at all care to discover that the galaxy is actually inhabited by an evil empire that once destroyed their forebears and everybody's forgotten? Well, I don't know if that's even what happened, because if it is, then we certainly don't care. We never commented on it at all. It just sort of happened. You can see me here poking around the other aspect of this game. There is a skirmish mode. You can play this like a classic multiplayer RTS, although I don't think it actually has multiplayer, at least in the remastered format, where you fight over a map and it's just a one and done skirmish game. Although this seems like a game that's very inappropriate for this game mode. If you compare it to something like Age of Empires, which benefits immensely from having tons of different kinds of maps and the maps being much more important to gameplay, in this game the map is barely relevant to gameplay, so generally you're always in a big open space with not much going on, so I can't see much replayability in having a skirmish mode. It feels like the games would always be very similar to each other in this circumstance, although perhaps it was just a standard feature of these games and so it's here anyway, even if it doesn't work particularly well, or at least doesn't work as well as other games that exceed in that sort of thing. I suppose that's an unfair comparison to make anyway. Well, that was Homeworld, and we're lucky to have gotten to the end, but I was still left disappointed. I was more disappointed though earlier in the game, so it did improve me seeing the entire thing rather than just the bit that I saw. But my takeaway is that I was much more happy with the game after, say, the first 3 or 4 stages, when I felt like it had more potential and that it was going somewhere, and as in many cases on this channel, I'm eventually disappointed by it not really going anywhere in particular, or at least not going somewhere that ended up interesting me. In this case, I think it is fair to say it doesn't go anywhere because there's so little plot or so little explanation for what's happening. There are just some stages, and even in terms of gameplay design, the stages are of wildly differing quality, difficulty, and gameplay style, varying between intense micro-heavy space battles, literally nothing in some cases where you just wander around a stage and then you win and nothing happens, and of course that really bad stage where you have to navigate the dust and it's just a living nightmare of 3D navigation in a 2D monitor space. Well, that's it for this game, I suppose. My recommendation is to play it up to the bad stage, or perhaps even stop before then, because you've already got most of the lore by that point. After that, nothing happens in the plot for all intents and purposes. And you've got the vibe, the cool vibe, the sci-fi vibe that I quite liked, the potentially Dune-inspired vibe I thought at first, although in the credits it explicitly said that this game is inspired by Star Wars. And I thought, well, it doesn't appear to be inspired by Star Wars to any real extent, but I guess it is a World War II in space game, and that's a bit like Star Wars, so maybe Star Wars is to blame for all of my complaints about World War II in space mechanics in video games that often come up on this channel. Who knows? I better get out of here. The next game I played for this channel is Timberborn, a beaver city builder, completely different to this because we needed a change of pace. But I do have more space games installed, so my quest to play every space game, including the other Homeworld games, will continue, and I will no doubt levy almost the exact same complaints against all of them, as I tend to do, and then by the end of it I can just be satisfied that yes, nobody made a space game that's good enough to satisfy fussy Devon. I can walk away from the world as the true superior master of not liking things that people made in the past. And isn't that the main goal in life? Well, it better be. I'll see you later.